Good morning. For those of you who don't know me, I am Laura Meyer-Dick, and my husband and I just bought a landmark.
This is the Landmark Building in Hutchinson, Kansas. And this is Laura. She wants to bring this abandoned 1920s hotel back to life to help revitalize this historic downtown and to honor the legacy of her father, Nation Meyer, who spent his life investing in this community.
He was very passionate about downtown. He kept asking me, what can we do to make downtown more thriving?
For years, the Landmark has stood in the center of downtown Hutchinson, empty inside, and all the signs of neglect were impossible to ignore.
The rebar is shown, and it's like, oh wow, that's going to be a task. How do you fix that?
The entire situation was symbolized by a single tree that was growing just inside the door off of North Main Street.
Damn thing's rooted down there.
And at one point, city leaders were openly discussing whether it was worth keeping at all.
The Landmark Hotel, if we do get to an impasse where we do have to pony up the money for demolition costs, I think we need to take it seriously.
And in a town that had already demolished some of its historic buildings, like St. Elizabeth's Mercy Hospital and the Atrium Hotel, that conversation carried a lot of weight. But this address wasn't always silent. When it opened in 1922 as the Hotel Stamy, it represented growth and momentum. Travelers filled its rooms. Conventions gathered in its lobby. A young Harry Truman once wrote letters on its stationery. And for decades, the building tracked the fortune of downtown itself, rising with it, and later declining alongside it. So when Laura and her team decided to step in, the entire town was excited to see how she was going to save this beautiful icon.
The historic Landmark Building in downtown Hutchinson finally breaking ground.
A 22-month planning process now underway on the Landmark.
Kitchen area, bath right there.
New windows, new exterior, tuck pointing, brickwork, framing, walls, floors.
Some days I think I'm crazy. It's a lot of work.
The goal of this restoration project is to see Hutchinson continue to grow and for it to become the next big domino to bring life back into the downtown area. But they have a long journey ahead of them because the Landmark has been sitting here abandoned at Main and Fifth Avenue since 2014. And on top of that, even before it closed, very few improvements had been made since the late 1970s, meaning that maintenance issues had been piling up for over 40 years.
In 21, there was a storm, and the rest of the roof blew off, and glass flew out of a lot of windows and ended up on Main Street. That was kind of a key turning point.
The Landmark Hotel, we really didn't have any options there. The next day after the storm, when we went to remove the barricades and the glass and window frames and items, had they hit pedestrians, would have or could have killed people.
It looked like Hutchinson was coming dangerously close to losing another piece of its history.
They're like, you have to fix this building or we're gonna tear it down. We went to the city, and when a local person came along and bought it, they were thrilled.
The Landmark will have new owners within 30 days. There's a local couple that's purchased it, and it's exciting.
But for Laura, this project was rooted in something personal. It was to carry forward something her father truly believed in.
His life was Hutchinson. He lived Hutchinson, he believed in it, and he was very strong in trying to keep Hutchinson going.
My name is Nation Meyer, and this is September 2014. I've been a resident of Hutchinson for 90 years plus.
He was one of a kind, very, very smart, very dedicated to the community.
Nation Meyer, he was Mr. Downtown. He was always wanting to make downtown better.
Here's the building we should have restored, but we couldn't get much interest in historic preservation, which I wish we'd never torn down.
And the commitment to Hutchinson that the Meyer family has had goes back generations.
You get a beautiful view of the city up here, and one of the best things is you can see the bank building that my great-grandfather started.
I am the beneficiary of being associated with the First National Bank of Hutchinson for many years, as was my father, E.W. Meyer, my two grandfathers, Pet Nation and E.L. Meyer.
And he passed on during COVID in 2020.
When he passed away, I started this project as a memorial to him. I had a friend who said, I'd like to do a project with you. And he sent me a picture of this, that it was for sale. Maybe we should look at the landmark. And then I came and looked at it, and I walked into this lobby space, and I immediately saw a beautiful vision. And I said, we can do this.
And as the team got started, they first wanted to do a walkthrough and inspect the building for any standout issues that they'd be facing. And as they were looking around, they made some pretty interesting discoveries.
There was a hidden room back here. A hidden room?
Walking about right here, I looked forward, and I knew the building was a perfect rectangle, and I went, wait a minute, the north side goes farther than this side. And we found something strong enough to pound through the drywall, and we pounded through and found that whole room back there.
Historically, this space had been the original kitchen for the restaurant that was here. But when it was moved to the other side of the lobby, this space was sealed off and used as storage for decades. And when this discovery was made, it immediately started inspiring some really cool ideas.
This wall can actually be taken out and you go all the way up. But we're thinking a small speakeasy right in here.
I love that.
You know, have an entrance off the alleyway, which is perfect.
And the more they looked around, more of the potential plans really started to shine through.
I envisioned 2 retail sections there.
We're open kitchen in here, and then hopefully this turns into a restaurant.
I'm looking for a restaurant that does serve coffee, because you know all 36 tenants are going to want coffee first thing in the morning.
But as all the ideas were flowing, the team would soon discover all of the issues that they had waiting for them.
I had no idea what I was getting myself into.
As Laura started to expand the team, she brought on Curtis Mitchell as a general contractor. And weirdly enough, this wasn't the first time he'd been in the landmark.
I had 3 other developers prior to Laura that had called me to come look at this, and as I'm walking through it, it's getting worse and worse every time I look at it, and so I was like, there's no way.
Even when it was last occupied, the people who ran the building when it was an apartment and did maintenance struggled to keep up with the poor condition and the outdated infrastructure.
I'm Selena.
Selena, nice to meet you. Thank you so much for coming down.
Uh-huh. Oh, looky, they got it all torn up.
Jesus, looks different.
Yeah. This is my child. She used to do.
I did all the maintenance here.
She did a lot of maintenance
Really?
here. Mm-hmm.
And this was really interesting to watch because when they got a chance to walk through it all these years later, memories of the challenges and issues they faced came flooding back.
The roof fell in on 502 up there, so we had that was a mess.
We redid these roofs so many times.
The building started, when it started selling, there was a lot of cracks, and we had to always usually build up the door frames because this was always falling apart.
Every time it rained, it would leak. And the fire panel would get wet. It would set the fire alarm off, and the fire department would have to come out every time.
There's always surprise in construction. There's a lot more expense to a project this large.
Because Laura wanted to do this project right, she was going to need to get really creative with securing more funding. She started looking into possible grants as well as historic tax credits, which are incentives that a lot of projects like this try to go after. But in order to get these, she'll have to find a way to get the landmark on the National Register of Historic Places. And when you successfully list a building on the NRHP, you have a whole new list of things to consider before construction begins. But there's a whole lot of work that goes into filling out these applications. So whenever this project finally started, Laura admits that she thought she could handle it herself and wouldn't need an outside developer.
I didn't understand exactly what a developer does. Developers just do paperwork. I can do paperwork.
But pretty quickly, she figured out she'd need to find the right one.
Historic preservation is not easy. I was naive and wandering into this project without any expertise. You need to find someone that does have the expertise.
As the list got more complicated, Laura needed to find the right developer, and fast.
3 people emailed me and said I needed to meet Justin Prejean. And then 3 people emailed him and said, you need to meet Laura and see this project.
My name is Justin Prejean. My company, which is called Pomeroy Development, we do mostly adaptive reuse and historic preservation projects in rural Kansas.
And right from the beginning, Laura and Justin hit it off.
We set up a time for coffee right before the Big 12 tournament.
And I showed up wearing the right color sweatshirt.
Yeah, he had a Jayhawk on his sweatshirt, so he immediately had him in, so. We think a lot alike, but I don't have the knowledge he does at all. He's 20 years younger than me, and he is brilliant. I think it took me about 10 minutes. He started asking me some questions about different tax implications and things, and I was like, didn't know anything about that. Looked at my husband, he's hired.
Justin had worked on plenty of historic restorations, but everyone was really curious on what he would think of the Landmark project. Just how big of a project is this going to be?
It's like trying to weave together a 36-ring Venn diagram. Being able to achieve financial viability is exceedingly difficult.
While Justin could handle bringing all of these pieces together, it was now time to get the landmark registered on the National Register of Historic Places, because an important part of how this project is going to work is if they can take advantage of the historic tax credits. And when Laura thought about who could help with securing that designation, one person came to mind.
You see the original finish on the storefront transom.
Brenda Spencer.
I worked with Hutchinson 37 years ago when they were a Main Street city. I was the state coordinator of the Kansas Main Street program. My specific expertise is the state and federal historic tax credits.
To register the building, they'd have to complete what's known as an evaluation of significance. So basically, Brenda would need to dig up as much research as possible to prove that the landmark is, in fact, historically significant. The story starts in 1922. That's when developer Robert Glasscock set out to build a new kind of hotel in downtown Hutchinson, one designed to match the city's rapid growth. At the time, the growth had been building for a while. While many were searching for oil, a massive underground salt deposit was discovered instead, reshaping the local economy and earning Hutchinson the nickname Salt City. And as that business expanded, so did the need for places that could host it. So the goal was to build something that would stand out, and out of that came a 5-story hotel positioned at one of the most prominent corners in the city. Glasscock brought on W.E. Holston Company as architects, along with the Stamey Mackey Construction Company, to bring that vision to life. C.W. Stamey built several buildings in Hutchinson during this time, and when I was talking to former Hutchinson's Downtown Development Executive Director Jim Seitnader, he pointed out an extra layer of the landmark's importance.
Mr. Stamey, he built a lot of the earlier elementary schools and things like that. Also a beautiful high school brick building, which have all come down.
So this is one of the last remaining buildings that they did?
That I'm aware of.
And Stamey's effort on this building clearly left an impression, because after much deliberation, it was decided that it would open under the name Hotel Stamey. And when it finally opened, it immediately established itself as a centerpiece of downtown. And you could tell because the grand opening was treated as a major civic event, with the local newspaper dedicating an entire page to the occasion. At the ceremony, the mayor was presented with a symbolic golden key meant to be passed down to the first convention that had its headquarters there. And that convention would come the next year.
The Kansas governor actually made the hotel his headquarters when Hutchinson hosted the 1924 State Democratic Convention.
And amongst its guests was a future president.
I got President Truman.
In 1926, long before he became president, Harry Truman stayed at the hotel while serving as a Jackson County judge. He was traveling through Kansas on official county business, likely studying the region's road or rail systems. During his stay on November 11, 1926, he wrote a 6-page letter to his wife, Bess, on the hotel's official stationery, which is now preserved in the National Archives, and a fascinating read. Taken together, these were just some of the details that made a solid case for the building's historical significance as a place tied to the growth, identity, and public life of Hutchinson. And with those details in place, Brenda submitted the application, and the landmark was officially added to the National Register of Historic Places, and, as a result, secured both the state and federal historic tax credits.
If we didn't get historic designation, we definitely couldn't have moved forward.
But in order to make projects like this work, you can't just rely on the tax credits. They were going to need to find other sources of funding, and that's where Justin's expertise comes in.
Justin, he wrote a beautiful 300-plus page grant, and that grant was awarded to us, and that's when we knew we could press go.
And now with the financing in place, the project could finally begin construction.
I started researching and doing the math on it in the summer of 22. So it's been a lot of paperwork since then and not a lot of fun. So I'm ready to start the fun part.
First on the list was removing the old glass from all of the windows and starting the interior demolition to make way for the new apartment layouts, which everyone got a chance to get in on.
It's fun to see this one finally happen. You know, it's feeling real now.
But as the team started making progress, the surprise setback started almost immediately. Because as the crews got further into the bones of the building, they discovered a complication that would have a huge impact on the whole project. The 4-inch thick concrete walls and floors that the building is made of were deteriorating heavily in the areas where they had decades of water leaks.
Back wall of the elevator shaft kind of collapsed on the second floor, so we'll have to repair that.
So as we started chipping away at the floor up there, we realized there was nothing left of it. It just kept crumbling. And so at that point, the next floor shaft was sitting on that wall. And so at that point, we're like, none of these are good. That was a big surprise.
The entire northwest corner of the building had sloughed off.
You can see the outside column is pretty significantly deteriorated.
Although some of this is to be expected with years of water leaks, a unique part of the building's history might have been the cause of the problem. You see, back in 1922, when the Stamey Mackey Construction Company was working on this building, they decided to add salt into the concrete mix. And being in Salt City, there was plenty of it to go around. And adding salt to the concrete can speed up the curing process, but in the long term, it can increase the porosity of the concrete, making it more susceptible to water damage.
Concrete is just a hard sponge, and so it soaks up the moisture, it sets, it retains it, and breaks down.
The construction team back then might have been looking for ways to speed things up, because C.W. Stamey was determined to get the building finished and opened by their April 1st deadline. The crew pushed through a brutal winter of a 40-man team working around the clock. And that compressed the timeline, along with a lack of building codes at the time, which might have led to a few other problems that Laura's team is now facing as well.
Curtis says there is not a 90-degree angle in this building anywhere.
The exterior walls are less than perfect.
I don't think I've been involved in a project that required this amount of structural repair.
On top of all that, the team discovered something about the walls on the 5th floor that was pretty concerning.
The walls were not attached to the roof.
The structural engineer said, no way. These are, because they were blowing in the winds we've had in the last couple weeks. You could see the walls blowing.
So on the 5th floor, you're going to find out they've taken out everything.
And this brings to mind another piece of the hotel's history. Back in 1924, when oil was finally discovered in Hutchinson, the Hotel Stamey became more popular than ever. And with that popularity, the owners at the time considered adding a 6th floor on the top of the building. So it's probably a good idea that those plans never came to pass. But despite the structural setbacks, the team had everything they needed to bring the building into the modern day and build it up stronger than before.
This is a structural framing support system to stabilize that corner. So they'll install this steel structurally in this corner all the way up and then repoint the outside of the building.
Right here is where the wall fell in.
So there's a lot of water rot, so this is going to be taken out and replaced.
We're going to build an entirely new back wall to the fire-rated elevator shaft that goes from the 2nd floor all the way up to the roof deck.
Engineers reinforced and rebuilt the weakened areas, and by the time that work was complete, the team was confident in what they had.
We knew we'd find some surprises, but it's solid. That's why it's still standing here today.
Once the structure was secure and the interior demo was complete, the new vision could finally start taking shape.
What you're seeing behind us would be the very start of partition framing. So they're laying out where's the kitchen go, where's the bathrooms go, where are the doorways.
This was really exciting when I walked up here and they're actually framing walls. And literally before I saw it, said, when am I going to start seeing some progress of new work instead of demo? And I walked around the corner and I was elated. So exciting, there's stuff moving around!
One of the major concerns going into this project was the roof.
The roof was pretty much gone when we got it.
So the team started on installing an entirely new one. But just as the installation began, they ran into something unexpected.
They'd just gotten started to doing the roof and they put all the supplies on there and put a fence around it. And Mother Nature took over that night and blew a pile in the center of this large pile up and over, took out the fence, took out some of the terracotta on the parapet wall up there, and the fence came crashing to the ground. Where the tiles along the brick are missing, that's where the fence came and took it down.
But even with that setback, work on the roof moved forward.
Mother Nature decided that she was going to set us back a few days and add some more repair, but yes, the roof is on.
A brand new roof was installed and outfitted with modern HVAC systems, and those damaged parts to the parapet were restored. And once the roof was secure, the team could install all the new walls on the 5th floor, ones that were finally tied to the structure above.
Everything up here is 100% new, including they put 18,000 pounds of concrete on here to smooth it out.
With the wall framing in place, work intensified on mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems. But the nature of the building came back to haunt them here too, because everywhere there weren't water leaks, the concrete walls were still solid, which introduced a different challenge.
The wiring and the piping and the electrical that have really been the challenge, because we have so many cement columns and cement walls and that we can't move.
Fire sprinklers were never around back in 1920 when this was built, so now we have to have them to meet current code and still make it not so obvious so that some of the history still came out in the apartments.
And this has still been one of the most present challenges of the whole project. How will this century-old building be brought back to modern standards, while still complying with the preservation standards that are required to keep the historic tax credits that this project relies on?
There's rules we have to follow in terms of appropriate treatments for historic buildings.
Throughout its many years, the Stamy went through several owners, and some took care of the building better than others, but none of them had to worry about these strict rules for preservation.
The biggest tax credit things were, keep this flooring, those windows, these windows behind you, the hallway being very long and straight were some key components.
There's an extensive amount of plaster that's inside this building, and so a lot of that has to be restored instead of replaced with drywall.
One of the toughest parts of the building for historical accuracy was the lobby. The ornate decorations of the hotel's heyday have largely been lost to time, and it's not easy to get them back today.
For example, the tile on the ground floor.
There's one company in the United States that still makes these antique tiles, and it is $5,000 a color, $75 a square foot to renovate this floor.
There was one pair of owners who contributed the most to dressing up the lobby.
The owners that really caught my eye were the Goldstein sisters, Bessie and Molly. They're the ones that are really credited with making some pretty major changes, early changes in the hotel. The hotel lobby opened onto the coffee shop, and the dining room expanded. That's when they renamed it to the Rose Room and redecorated the dining room. This door had openings in it that they enlarged, but these two beams and this ceiling are original.
The team has had to rely largely on historic newspapers and documents to find these details.
Sadly, the prior owners had destroyed a lot, so we weren't sure what was here to save.
And on top of that, there were very few historical photos of the interior of the building. One of the only sources that we could find that showed the inside of the hotel was a bit unconventional. After the Goldstein sisters, the new owners were Larry Beck and William Cross, and it was under their ownership in 1952 when director Henry King decided to use the hotel as a filming location for his up-and-coming movie, Wait Till the Sun Shines Nellie.
All of us have been through that movie so many times, and there's really two 1-second clips that give us some historic information that we don't have. And one of those is looking right here, and it's the railing on the mezzanine there that's gone.
Don't really know. George. Yes, Mr. Halper. Put that in Senator Slocum's box, will you? Yes, sir.
And then you could clearly see all the paneling, that we knew was here.
And it just so happens that we got to speak with someone who lived here in Hutchinson at the time and was actually in the movie.
If you look quick, you can see my kneecap. I'm a trombone player on the front row.
And he was able to tell us a little bit about what the Hotel Stamy was like back then.
They used to have one of the best drug counters in the town. That's where we went on dates and after sessions and stuff. make good milkshakes and all kinds of stuff.
But that era didn't last much longer. Even with the attention from the new movie, the hotel was already facing a shift in how people traveled. As roadside motels grew in popularity, the Stamy began to lose its place, and Beck & Cross sold the hotel in 1957. It was the next owner, Menzo Hainline, who rebranded it as the Landmark and gradually converted it into apartments. And it was this conversion that stripped away a lot of the historical features that are missing today. But despite so much of it being lost, the team kept searching for any clues they could find.
You know, as drastic as the alterations were on the upper floors for the conversion to apartments, it's all here. It may not seem that way to people that would walk in the first floor here, but it's really amazing. You know, there's one place right there where the wood paneling is in place versus on all these green walls here, you see the shadow of where the paneling was removed.
Even after decades of alterations, pieces of the history are still there, just hidden in plain sight. Holding on to those details often comes down to how much of the original structure can realistically be saved. So how do you preserve the history when all of the original materials no longer work? For example, the windows. Luckily, the transom glass had been covered.
There's a piece of the transom glass.
What is it?
Transom, prism glass that goes in the transom openings.
But many of the rest of the windows were missing altogether, and what was left of the old ones were deteriorating, which is definitely not up to modern code standards.
We are removing the window frames. We're taking the old exterior rotted out wood and removing it from the original brick.
But you can't just replace them with any windows.
The very big thing for the state historic preservation is the windows have to be the same. So when we couldn't change the color, I mean, they had to be white, they had to look just like the old ones. All of the windows are custom built because every window in here is a little bit different size. People keep asking me, when are you gonna finish the windows? They are strategically still out because, I mean, we gotta get all the cabinets in, you gotta get the toilets in, you gotta get ovens in, you've gotta get all that stuff in, and it's easier to use the scissor lift than haul them all up the stairs.
And those things would be coming in soon, because once the team worked their way around the concrete walls, the drywall could finally start going up.
Now with the drywall, that was like Christmas morning for me. That was so amazing to see the apartments actually coming to shape.
So it actually looks like a real apartment now.
And soon after, starting from the top floor and working their way down, the brand new Meyer Landmark was finally coming together.
We've got the wood floors out here in the family rooms and the hallways. That's all done on the 5th floor. Paint's on the walls, tile in the bathrooms, vanities are in, all the onyx showers are in. Each floor is identical. We had to make sure that the walls lined up, quarter walls, interior walls, every wall had to line up because we brought plumbing all the way from the basement all the way up to the roof. We were kind of shocked that we were actually making that happen.
Even down in the lobby, framing was completed and the team was preparing to start on my favorite feature, the original tile floor.
We're getting very close, so they're gonna start drywalling, I think, next week on this floor.
And once the larger pieces made their way to the upper floors, the new windows could finally go in. Where the Meyer Landmark is today is a far cry from the last time it was open. And after it was converted to apartments, it changed owners one more time in 1977. And since then, not much had been done to maintain or update it. It started falling to disrepair even before it was abandoned. The last owner even tried selling the building on eBay for a fraction of what it was worth. But despite its declining condition towards the end, the people who called it home then still made it a community.
Everybody was like a family. We would have
4th of July
parties together as a family here
Christmas,
with
Thanksgiving.
everybody in the building. We'd do Christmas dinners, we'd do Thanksgiving dinners. I mean, we just did everything together.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what Laura wants to turn the Landmark back into, a place for people to call home and a place for the community to gather again.
We got a couple of plans here, either for there to be like some co-working space or office space.
We have a restaurant The retail spaces will come after that. The speakeasy we've had a tenant since we pretty much started the project, and I was talking to a tenant for this space this week, so that would make us full.
Any apartment tenants lined up yet?
We have 120, and I need to start going through that list, so I think we'll be full fairly soon.
And with opening day approaching, the team now gets to move their focus to the finishing touches.
So we're gonna do 3 chandeliers in here.
We bought a baby grand piano that will go in the lobby.
I think we can just do one over the fireplace and one in the vestibule.
But there was one more final detail that Laura needed to figure out.
The marble baseboard, that's another historic feature, but we were short 44 feet. We couldn't find a good imitation.
It's gorgeous. I mean, it's black with
409.
very nice green stems in it. And this, this was a 6-inch base.
But then something incredible happened. A gift from the project's guardian angel.
And one day I walked into work and I looked down and I went, that's the same baseboard as in the Landmark. It's green marble. And I said, if I knew my dad, he always bought extra of everything. I'm gonna go out in the garage and look. And I went, sure enough, there's 8 slabs of green marble, exactly the same. So the bank is gonna let me use that in the lobby.
So with these final details in place, and with a stamp of approval from Nation Meyer himself,
so he liked it.
He liked it.
The time had finally come to open the Meyer Landmark.
It's pretty exciting and a little shocking and unbelievable. And if you look at what this place looked like 18 months ago and what it looks like today, that's just MBC Construction performed a miracle.
I was excited for this day and dreading it all at the same time. So there was a few times I had my doubts.
Well, you guys did exactly what you said you were going to do.
Yeah.
Which is hard to find anymore.
I guess we did all right.
Today is the ribbon cutting ceremony, and while the apartments upstairs are finished and move-in ready, the finishing touches are still being finalized on the retail spaces, restaurant, and speakeasy downstairs. And right up until opening day, new discoveries were still being made on this historic building.
This was the one original storefront that was still in place. Did you see those copper doors? They were painted. We didn't know the copper sheathing was under it. I think they spent their entire day polishing those copper doors. Everybody on this team has bought into it, and that's another thing that really makes it special.
After decades of neglect and abandonment, and after 4 years of restoration efforts, the team could finally step back and admire what they had accomplished.
Just an incredible accomplishment. I mean, Laura and Mike should be so proud. Everybody should be so proud.
And just like the first day it opened in 1923, the grand reopening was treated as a celebration.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Meyer Landmark. I truly can't believe this day is finally here. Here we are 4 years later, and we built an amazing team and we pulled this all together. We would not be here 100% sure if it was not, don't hide back there, for Justin Prejean. He is an amazing developer. The State Historic Preservation Office has been amazing to work with, and I have learned so much about historic preservation, and I kind of have a passion about it now. But most of all, thank you to my dad for teaching me to dream big and to give back to our community.
I want to deflect the credit for the people who are here in person, sweating every day for, it's literally tens of thousands of hours. Thank you to the contractors, the subcontractors. It's just an incredible achievement. Can we give a round of applause to the folks that are the contractors?
What an adventure it's been. What an amazing woman that I can call my wife. I've never seen anyone so driven.
This is such an exciting day. I remember those early conversations when Nation Meyer was still living. He had big plans for downtown, and he knew that the way to bring it alive was to create spaces like this for people to congregate and people to live. We had been just waiting for the right person to come along that had the guts to take this project on, and it either takes a lot of guts or you gotta be crazy, and I think Laura is a little bit of both. I can say that as her friend. And I'm really grateful to Laura and Mike for bringing the team together to really create something transformational for Hutchinson. So let's give another big round of applause to Laura and Mike.
It's about an old brick building with the years of history.
Successful historic restoration like this is not easy. It takes serious time and commitment, and the right group of people from the community and the people who will call this place home to the people who made it happen.
This project has forever changed me and who I am. One of the biggest benefits that's come out of this for me is I've gained some really good friends.
They say the old landmark in nation's memory.
To the man who inspired it all.
When the early settlers got here, there were no trees, and the current crew that's planting trees all over the city is doing a beautiful job. We ought to keep it that way.
When all the right pieces come together, it just goes to show that just because a building is abandoned doesn't mean it's the end of the story.
They say the old landmark.
And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe to our channel because we have so many more projects just like this coming soon. And if you want us to feature your story on this channel, send us an email at the address in the description.